Hey, everybody. Welcome. Happy Friday. Welcome to our 1213th weekly privacy chat. I have no clue what number it is. All I know is that we have a 15th anniversary coming up. So look forward to seeing many of you in our upcoming 15th anniversary celebrations. I am joined today by the amazing Adonne Washington. Adonne leads our mobility and location work. How many privacy groups have a group focused very specifically on mobility? That means obviously cars, micromobility, scooters. It means tracking your location broadly. And Adonne has been doing some incredibly interesting work. We are going to talk specifically about a very recent project that she launched yesterday. Well, she started quite a while ago, but we put out the report yesterday. And we're going to talk a little bit about the results of a survey we did with some, I think, interesting and surprising takeaways. We'll work through some of those numbers. And this interesting rulemaking going on where we are going to either get a solution to drunk driving, an end to privacy, or maybe technology that is structured in a balanced way that keeps us safer and puts responsible rules around how data is used. I don't know. We're going to get into it. Adonne, let's start with the, hey, welcome, hi, and two, well, maybe the survey. Let's what did we learn? It's always interesting when you actually talk to actual consumers instead of, the chattering class of experts. What did we ask them? What did we learn when we raised the whole range of interesting data and car related questions?
Sure. Thanks, Jules. Hello. So yes, long time coming. I've been talking about cars and privacy in a number of different forms and fashions. So excited to have this report out there and live for all of you to see and go through with us. I think one of the big things that Jules mentioned, the consumer survey, not something that FPF always does, but we got a really good opportunity and unique one here to ask individuals how they actually felt about privacy in their vehicles generally, in addition to digging in a bit deeper, as Jules mentioned, to that ANPRM and the impaired driving technology. And we have some big kind of just takeaways here. The main ones, and we can get into the numbers a bit more as we go forward, but straight off, we learned that many drivers value vehicle safety systems. And so for reference, the vehicle space has a lot of acronyms. Vehicle safety systems is our term for advanced driver assistance systems, driver monitoring systems, impairment detection systems. Vehicle safety systems kind of encompasses all of those wonderful acronyms that we see in the vehicle space. And so many drivers do value these vehicle safety systems. However, there is a constant thread of worry for their privacy and for their data in these systems and in the vehicles generally. Individuals do generally have strong trust for car makers' data practices, more than online companies and social media companies. However, they still have worries about how that information is collected and how it relates to their behavior and anything that could identify the individual. Most drivers do also support the use of impairment detection technology that Jules mentioned, but have those same kind of accuracy, privacy, cost concerns that they experience and show for other types of systems. And then finally, I think the big takeaway that we learned was individuals say that privacy and data protection practices, such as disclosure limits, encryption, on-car processing and storage, and de-identification are must-haves for either impairment detection technologies or across the board with other advanced driver assistance systems, driver monitoring, so ADAS and DMS systems.
So let's pull up, I think we've got some graphics, and Payal and our comms team are going to pop them up here. Alcohol detection technology. So people are obviously aware of quote unquote breathalyzers. This is not a built-in breathalyzer, right? It's not brand new that in some areas, jurisdictions, if you get convicted of, DUIs, there might be a mandate to have a breathalyzer, device that you got to blow into to be able to start your car.
An aftermarket ignition interlock system. Right. For that purpose.
We know about law enforcement, using breathalyzers. What exactly are we talking about when it comes to this technology? How's my car going to know that I'm stinking drunk?
Well, your car could know a couple of different ways. So one of the big things that the ANPRM highlights, that our survey looks at, are the specific kind of alcohol detection technology. So Jules, great job at distinguishing between breathalyzers, because that is just not what we mean. And that is not what the mandate is looking to do here. So an alcohol detection technology, such as the DAD system developed by the Automotive Coalition for Traffic Safety, and other companies out there, I'm sure have been working on similar sorts of technologies, are actually going to detect the alcohol levels through spectroscopy by looking, through a handprint and looking at the blood and determining alcohol content, or through passive breath. So not a directed breath like a breathalyzer where you actually have to blow into the tube, but a directed breath that is caught through an ambient sensor that would be in the vehicle and can determine the actual alcohol levels and concentration in your breath. And so the alcohol detection technology is specifically detecting the actual amounts of alcohol. These are in process and have been currently made available to certain fleet companies to use them in their in those fleet management vehicles. However, they're working on putting this and making it applicable for consumer vehicles. The other side of the technology that we investigate here, and we'll go to the next graphic in just a second, but to distinguish, the other types of technology that we're talking about are the ones that people are likely more familiar with. And so we mean the camera, the in-vehicle and in-cabin cameras that might be in your car. We mean some of the other features like lane assistance that monitors when you might swerve in and out of a lane, or correct your lane position. And those technologies together might infer that you are intoxicated, but are not doing the same work of an alcohol detection technology that knows for a fact. So as you can see in the graphic, one of our survey stats pulled out for the alcohol detection technologies, that accuracy and privacy, as you can see, are two of the biggest concerns that individuals have when thinking about these technologies in their vehicles. And so if we want to actually go to the next graphic, sorry, I thought we had the next one, was we see the same numbers essentially show up for vehicle safety systems across the board. But yeah, let me pause there, Jules.
Yeah, so interesting. So on the previous slide, we saw that the biggest issue was accuracy. And I guess that's right? Like if I say to you, if somebody is so intoxicated, like, do you think it's okay that their car should start? And, your answer is probably no. But your answer is probably also like, well, what if I have a beer? What if I had some mouthwash? Like, what if it's an emergency? Like, is this, am I going to not be able to drive my car when I should? And so accuracy first. And then that privacy number is interesting. Go to the next slide, and it's useful to see that whenever we talk to people a little bit about data in cars, they generally have a privacy concern. So the number was a little higher to learn about, alcohol, but they're also worried about whether the navigation system is sending the data, well, maybe to insurance companies, something that was, in the news generally. So eye tracking lower, that was sort of interesting. And again, these are pretty new, and, I think the survey was done quite well, but it's not like you get to sit down and say to people, let's really explain to you how this works when you're doing a survey that is quantitative. It might be interesting one day to come back and do a little more qualitative and like show and, deep dive. But at a high level, when surveyed and asked about these kinds of things, it's interesting to see the spread in what gets people more nervous than not. And it's interesting to see how navigation and crash were high. Biometric, which maybe they ought to be super scared about, but they didn't seem to have as big an issue, maybe because they're getting used to like opening up their phone with their finger and their face. And so the idea that, your car might unlock or start based on that seems to be getting a little bit more normalized. So super interesting. What else do we have? Let's go to the next one.
Sure. I will just say on the biometric piece, one of the things that we did when we were asking our survey questions, we were talking about technologies that did actually exist in the moment. We were also sort of thinking towards the future on what could be. And the biometric one, I think, is a good point, because it's not that people aren't particularly familiar. I think in the car context, we haven't seen it as much yet. I do think there is a potential market for, biometric access to vehicle, be it through fingerprint or be it through face recognition. We just haven't quite reached that stage yet. So definitely something to think about when we're thinking about vehicle safety systems across the board, but also for those impairment and alcohol detection technologies.
Yeah, interesting point. They experience some of these others, and that's why there's a certain result, and they haven't yet really experienced in a significant way a biometric car thing. And maybe when they do, they'll worry about it more. Great. Next graphic. What are we looking at here?
So in general, we asked individuals what do they need in order for these driver safety systems to protect privacy, or to feel that their privacy is protected. Consistently, kind of across the board, we saw that a lot of them noted that they aren't sure that there's any one thing that would allow them the certainty that their privacy would be protected. However, we do see assurances of the privacy and safety in the systems used. We see transparency in data uses, approval of the system, such as consent, written consent or approval, deletion of user data, don't share data with third parties. For all clarity, these were open-ended questions. So this was one of the last questions that we asked in our survey. And it was just an open-ended one to see kind of what things people might get to. So that might also show why we kind of have that first one, which is nothing would make them feel they got to the end of the survey and might have reached that point. But we do see a trend for a lot of the other traditional kind of things that we actually make in recommendations. So the protection and transparency around the data usage, the written consent and approval mechanisms, which we do have in vehicles right now. But I think sometimes that consent is lumped in with multiple rounds, right? So you consent the first time and then multiple other things happen, or you consent the first time to all of the things and then you sell your car on the private market, and now the next individual doesn't ever see those consent notices pop up. You don't share data with third parties. I think, of course, timely in light of the New York Times article around insurance. And so the sharing with data with third parties was something that we saw across the board as a trend that individuals were very concerned about and had feelings about. The user control over data, providing individuals the ability to access that information and data in the car, guarantees that the technology is accurate. That accuracy piece is really important when we're talking about technology to detect impairment and or alcohol intoxication levels, right? That accuracy becomes difficult when the ANPRM didn't define what accurate was going to actually look like. And so there's a bit of an open interpretation on how we actually are going to define accurate in this context. And then, as you can see, there are some of the other ones that popped up: encryption, understanding more research, anonymization, de-identification, government intervention, diminished with the data, and some of the other, such as password protection and so on.
Cool, thank you. Interesting to see how poorly or very limited the more legal protection. And very often in privacy surveys, we see a lot of support for like strong laws that will, protect us and all that. And it could quite well be that, again, people are not aware at all. Like they know there's something called HIPAA. They don't know what it protects. They know it's got something to do with health data, but they also thought it meant like their COVID information, and that obviously wasn't often, protected. We do have a number of important pieces of legislation around automotive data, right? Very specific, the famous event data recorders, the so-called black boxes. Most people are not aware, for instance, that that data is typically only on your vehicle. It requires your permission for it to be shared. It doesn't, automatically go typically to law enforcement or insurance companies. It only collects data typically right before an accident. It's not like monitoring everything at all time, although increasingly the onboard diagnostic systems are. So there might be opportunities here to educate people a bit more about what their current rights are. Obviously, a lot of these new state laws give you rights to delete data and so forth. What else did we learn? I think we've got some more graphics here. Okay, so now you actually get into the driver behavior monitoring technology. And what did people tell us here when we dug into some of the questions?
So again, as Jules pointed out, one of the difficulties with writing a survey, this was my first go around at writing a survey. And so one of the difficulties was recognizing we did not have the space to define absolutely every sort of technology in full and make it very clear. So one of the things that we looked at was the driver behavior kind of monitoring. And so that behavior is important when we think about the weaving, the leaving the lane, tailgating, showing other signs of potential impaired driving. And impaired in this instance could also mean drowsy driving, distracted driving, anything that might cause you to not be focused on driving safely. And so the must-have was the word that we used to really try and suss out what individuals needed to trust these technologies, to have them in their car. And so that data sharing with third parties was a really big one. And data encryption, the data anonymization, the storage of that information. So thinking about data that's going to be coming off of these technologies, how is that stored? Where does it live? Does it live on your car? Is it sent off of your vehicle? Ensuring that there is clear understanding around what happens, but limiting the sending that data off the vehicle in certain circumstances. Data deletion after a fixed period or not maintained as part of a permanent database. Data that's never stored and instantly deleted, again, came up. Some mentioned none of these, unsure, of course. So I think one of the things that we really look at again when we were making our recommendations were the must-haves that individuals were looking for, and recommending ways that manufacturers, the policymakers could ensure that these must-have or essential aspects of technology are encompassed in any forthcoming rules or encompassed in the technology as it's being built.
I'm now looking in the study, and by the way, I think we've posted the link. I see Nancy has to the actual report and the conclusions from the survey. So please do download it from our site if you are interested. I'm looking at figure 7. I don't recall if that's one of the graphics, but it's the one that basically says that people, I'll read it in general, how much would you say that you trust that data collected about passenger cars is kept safe? If we've got that one, pull it up. But if not, I'll show it to everyone right here, but do download it. And 17% said that they trust, here it is, they trust a great deal, and 34% that they trust somewhat. Now, that's a lot, right? Do a little math there. That's like 50% positive, which is really pretty good in this world where, typically we see, very negative results when we ask people about companies and data. Now, important caveat is that anyone who's following this knows that there have been some very negative stories in recent months. There was this very harsh report that Mozilla put out that was very critical of the privacy policies and the liberties that many of the policies take. And then our friend Kashmir Hill had a blockbuster story focused on the driver apps that people download sometimes to manage their vehicle or to share data to give themselves feedback, and the reality that data is going from some of those apps to insurance companies, and those companies are then canceling or raising prices and making it very hard for people to get insurance. So this is a snapshot. I don't know that those recent stories have moved the dial. Maybe we'll come back and do a follow-up. But when we asked this back in July, we got some real trust in general. And Adonne, we're talking, and it does seem that one of the answers maybe is it's very hard for consumers to differentiate sort of their feelings about privacy and their broader feelings about, like, do I trust this company? Do I rely on them? Does this service generally do what it says? If you generally survey, for instance, about Well, maybe Google, right? Google gets a lot of debate in our privacy circles, and we all know that that's a lot of data out there across all the different Google services. And when you drill down, people show that they're concerned. But when you ask them high level, as soon as Google has a new app, everyone downloads it. And when you ask, young people, hey, where do you want to go to work? Right? Google is like top in terms of global brand appreciation. American Express, super brand appreciation. It's hard for people to distinguish between I rely on this company, I use them, and they have great utility to me, and oh my God, the privacy issues, right? And so when you drill down further in the next couple of results, even though the numbers were high here, people might have been simply saying, hey, I drive a Volvo, it's supposed to be safe. I trust, yes, even if you're asking me about privacy, I trust the company. But when we drill down further, you actually saw people being very negative when you said, oh, what about what they do with data? Then we got much more harsh critique.
I think there's also something to be said about, even if you don't own a car yourself, you are spending time in a vehicle. So a lot of people have just a general recognition for having to call an Uber, or if you live in a city, you can use a Free to Move, you can use a Zip car. So everyone has a relationship with a vehicle that they might not always have with a social media company and things like that. So I would agree that there is probably just some overwhelming trust for kind of like, and there's also brand loyalty, right, with vehicles, American-made vehicles, or people love their whatever car brand that they are, beholden to. So I think there is some of that. But I do think it's important to, as you mentioned, highlight kind of once you drill down onto the actual aspects of what might be happening with data and where things are going, that is where the awareness starts to pick up. I don't know that it's only specific in the vehicle industry. I'd be interested to see how it looks across, but I would say that probably is a trend that we are going to start to see in individuals, across multiple sectors. I see Joe. Hi, Joe. Joe Jerome's question about the automotive privacy principles, directly on point. The principles come from the Automotive Alliance for Innovation, and so they are not an FPF work product. And we do look to them and point to them as often as we can. I think if I can answer your question quickly, and happy to always talk more, Joe, about your thoughts here, but we mentioned them specifically, and the principles do have the requirement that auto manufacturers do not share that information, do not sell or share that data. And what's happening in the automotive industry, I think it comes down to looking at those principles and having a reckoning with what is everyone actually doing, and a check-in on how that's actually going. So the best that I can say right now is those principles do exist for the purpose of exactly what you described, for being transparent, and not selling or sharing the driver behavior data. But I'll leave that one right there.
Well, so look, I'll add this. Do consumers know that there is such a thing as the principles, right? And I'd say the answer is probably no, right? Who has told them about it? We did a dealer guide a number of years ago for dealers to give out, to try to tell people, hey, your car has a lot of data, and hey, if you sell your car, you ought to clear the data, and you have some rights to delete the data, and there are these principles. And most of the major auto companies in the world have signed on to those principles. They are enforceable by an FTC or an AG and so on and so forth. And they do generally well cover many of the major issues. They do require transparency. They do say you can't sell data like this without express permission. The new state laws cover some of this as well, given the sensitivity of data and sale and sharing. And so the question is, are companies living up to the principles? Kashmir's story, I think, raises the question, and I do expect that there'll be some hard looks at both the principles as well as state law compliance. California, I believe, has sent letters. Was it the privacy agency or the AG's office? I forget which, to most of the major companies saying, hey, how are you complying with state law? I don't know if they raised also, and by the way, those principles you committed to that we, certainly the AG's office, can enforce against. So I do expect that when they take a close look, if indeed they find that there are companies that are living up, we'll see some real consequences. I'll also say that as I've looked at some of the notices, one thing that might be missing, right? And you're a lawyer, maybe working for a company, and you read the principles, and they say, you need to provide, prominent, notice and permission. So if I click through like a page that says, when you download this driver app, you agree that you're going to get information about how well you drive and are you safe. And it does these other 6 things, and it has advertising. Oh, and it shares data with third parties who might share it with insurance companies. Like, is that clear and prominent and an express, permission? I'd say probably not, right? Did some lawyer at a company sort of look at it and be like, I don't know, I'm clicking, the user's opting in, they're saying yes. Whether or not they're clicking and they're forgetting about it, or they're clicking and they don't even see it, or whether it's prominent enough, it's clear there's a problem. And that when, Kashmir reached out to people, they were surprised, or when they learned that they weren't getting insurance, they were surprised. So there's clearly a problem. And our argument to the industry is, look, you're not ad tech. No one is giving me a free car or even giving me like a giant discount on a Mercedes or the latest model vehicle in return for my data. No one said, here, put this bumper sticker on and we'll like send you some money, or we'll give you a big discount, right? You are generally putting technologies that, even the kind of tough critics at Consumer Reports want in these vehicles, right? We want people self-monitoring their behavior to not like kill people when they drive. We want people being warned that they're drowsy and they're, moving out of their lane. We want people who are stinking drunk not driving, right? We may or may not love, targeted ads. We do want these technologies. And the auto industry has an opportunity to, lean into the fact that people want safety and want security, and not go the way of ad tech, where we have law after law and criticism after criticism, or even our mobile phones, where, again, incredible utility, but we're all a little worried about like what the data, where is it going and what's happening. And so I don't think it's too late. And I think what you saw from your convening yesterday and from discussions, well, let me ask you, we saw where ad tech went. Everyone had good motivations, and now our data goes everywhere, and it's hard to kind of figure out how to put the genie back in the bottle. Mobile, well, now we see like Apple and Google setting stricter rules, and people, apps have to opt in, and we're getting better, but it's still a little bit of a wild west when you talk about what some of these apps do with data. Is it too late? Is the genie out of the bottle? Is the data already going everywhere? Or I think it's early enough. Does industry have a different view here than civil society, Consumer Reports, regulators? Like, where do we go going forward? Is there a kumbaya opportunity here for everyone to get on the same page, or is it going to be the Wild West?
I do think we have time before it gets to be the Wild West. One thing I will also add in terms of our recommendations, we wanted to provide recommendations really kind of specifically to the vehicle safety system. So we were really thinking about the new technologies that are likely to be in vehicles, and we wanted to provide recommendations for thinking about these technologies more explicitly than even potentially some of the other aspects of vehicle data, such as, did your engine turn over, and other kind of general telematics information. So we were really trying to provide recommendations that can help, so we don't end up in the Wild West, where as we're looking at these new technologies, specifically, in light of the ANPRM, when we're talking about impairment detection technology and alcohol detection technology, and looking at those and thinking about, okay, these are going to create very specific data points. I think Jordan asked in the question, asked a question as it relates to kind of like the sensitivity of the types of data. While we didn't get super specific, the trust and safety of data vary based on category and perceived sensitivity of certain types of data. So like health data versus location data, we didn't fully get, we weren't fully able to delve in at such a granular level in the survey. However, when we're thinking about these technologies, we are thinking about the possibility of that health data, right? If we are taking a health data point, or if we're taking an alcohol reading of an individual, that might implicate health data depending on what state you live in, right? And so thinking about the extra sensitivity of the data that is going to be coming from some of these technologies and likely to fit the mandate to ensure that individuals are not driving under the influence of alcohol. We are recognizing that, all of these recommendations that we've given are really to kind of hone in on that. So I hope we were able to answer that question, Jordan. I hope we were able to answer your question as it relates to kind of the sensitivity of that data. Is the genie out of the bottle? A bit, but are we at the Wild West where it's just going to be a free for all and whatever's going to happen happens? I don't think so. I think we are at a point where we're going to see the industry and individuals in the vehicle life cycle trying to reconcile what to do next. Where do we go from here?
Kosha asks us about anthropomorphism and how it might be used to support vehicle safety while ensuring user privacy. And Kosha, correct me if I'm wrong. I think what you're asking, and I don't think we know the answer to this, but it's a really thoughtful question. Anthropomorphism typically means using, instead of like a warning that is like a silly icon or something, but using a face, using, human elements. If my AI pretends to be a person instead of a robotic machine, I might interact with it in a certain way. When we see a face, we know, oh, that means facial recording, like using human cues because we are trained to react to faces and smiles and grimaces and so forth in a natural, evolutionary way. I don't know that I see much use yet of anthropomorphism, in the way people are being told about what's going on. There's been some work to try to use, icons that might display on your dashboard that could like help that like location is being sent off a device, right? And that's sort of an example of where I'd say maybe it's not so much like anthropomorphism, but like we know what a location symbol looks like. We've seen that on our phones, and we know what like a GPS, we know what Wi-Fi looks like. So like automotive, I guess, shouldn't invent new things. I know when I open up the driver's manual and or anyone who's got one of those lights, you're like, what does that mean exactly? Like, does that mean my brake engine is failing? Or like, I don't know. And I got to go to the shop for them to tell me that it means like that the gas seal wasn't like closed tightly enough. So I do think there's work to be done because look, if I'm driving, I'm not going to be reading a privacy policy, right? I'm probably not even reading like a disclosure. Do I want to actually be trying to figure out how to like push a pop-up on that infotainment center? It's hard enough to use, right? So I think important point that in vehicles, we particularly need nuanced work. We talk about icons on a web page and no one's really nailed that yet, but like I can read things on a web page and maybe I can read things on my phone. I don't want to be scrolling through things while I'm like navigating through an intersection because my car is trying to communicate. So user interface, this is an area, one of Adonne's colleagues who she works closely with, Jameson, Spivak leads our work on immersive tech. And so things like heads up displays and, environmental kind of cues, I think could play a critical role. So let's leave the survey for a second. And I want to, in the few minutes we have left, just level set with people like where this whole process stands. Like, why are we talking about it now? There was a law passed in the Biden infrastructure package that said there's a certain mandate. And Adonne a couple of times has talked about an ANPRM. So the insiders in Washington are all like, oh yeah, ANPRM, right? But like, what's actually happening now? How soon is my car going to be like, you're drunk, Jules, you can't drive? Where are we in the process? What's going on?
Sure. And I've broken my own rule of using acronyms and not giving you the full name. So an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking is a tool that agencies have at their disposal. So in light of the 2021 Infrastructure Act, as Jules mentioned, there is a mandate to include or have the Department of Transportation and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration promulgate a rule for advanced impairment detection technology in vehicles. And that ANPRM, Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, went live in January of 2024. And the comment period was open for 60 days. It closed on March 5th. FPF did submit comments, and they kind of align with our report recommendations, but we really look at the consumer trust. So this Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking is like the first step in the agency's rulemaking process. Their goal is to have a sort of more proposed rule by November of 2024. I will do my very lawyerly diplomatic moment of saying, we'll see if that happens and let you interpret that how you will. It might be too soon, it might not be, we'll see. And so as soon they'll promulgate the rule, there'll be another round of comments, and then they'll go into the final processes for making the rule. In the mandate, they were given about until 2026, and they have an option for a potential extension from Congress. And let's be clear, this is not going to require that you take in your 2008, whatever you drive, to go and have it outfitted with this new technology. This only applies to new vehicles that will be going on the market and that will be made after the rule is established. And the rule is a federal motor vehicle safety standard that would be required. So that is what the rule will essentially take the form of. And so that is where we are. A number of individuals, organizations, companies, entities, whomever, submitted letters for this ANPRM back in March, at the top of the month. And so it was an overwhelming number. I believe I was talking with Stephanie Manning from MAD yesterday, who mentioned that there were about 16,000, or maybe it was slightly more. Math is not my strong suit. And so it was a record number, and going through them, you're going to see kind of a flavor for recommendations potentially from auto manufacturers on what they might be working on. You'll see concerns like ours related to privacy, but you'll also see an understanding of how we even got to this rule and understanding the position that victims and survivors of incidences of drunk driving and where they are and how they feel about kind of this technology. We can all agree that it's absolutely necessary for safety. And so the path forward might not be clear at the moment, but we are definitely working towards, and NHTSA is investigating the best way to move forward with the technology.
My personal prediction, on one hand, obviously the advocacy by Mothers Against Drunk Driving and everyone who's aware of the incredible dangers is going to be compelling to a lot of users and certainly people on the political side. Mm-hmm. I can also see somebody in the political office at any of the re-election campaigns, Democrat or Republican, saying, that swing voter who lives in a rural state, drives a Ford 150, has a gun in the glove compartment, never, thinks about freedom, being told that if they have 2 beers, their truck's not going to start to drive them home. Pretty controversial. So I'm not surprised that there's a slow and deliberative process. The good thing is that there's time to think through the consequences and for privacy to obviously be on the table. So that's a positive thing. The biggest issue might be go ahead, sorry.
I just want to step back from the controversial individual that you've just described. Let's take away the controversy of it and let's apply it to someone who lives in a rural place and present an emergency circumstance. And so the closest hospital to you in your rural community might be 30 minutes away, and you're at a party and you've had a beer or two, and now someone desperately needs to make it to the hospital. How do you handle your car not being able to move potentially? So there are some difficulties that need to be sussed out and made very clear for when this technology does go forward. But I think it's important to kind of even take it away from the controversial, the emergency circumstance. Yesterday, Kara Silk raised what about a medical condition that might cause you to present as impaired, or a medication you're taking that might cause you to have positive for alcohol on your breath. Thinking about those medical conditions and those other circumstances will be something that NHTSA has to work through when promulgating this rule. So there's not anything left off the table as NHTSA and DOT are thinking about this rule, including those kind of emergency circumstances, the potential the potential for medical circumstance. One of the recommendations that we had really highlights that privacy needs to be thought about from moment that it begins to the end, because we are ensuring that those in marginalized and multi-marginalized communities are also not impacted differently. If we're talking about, let's stick a camera in the car, right? Can it see the driver? Very important in the context of how this technology is actually going to be accurate and effective.
Yeah, we should flag the particular concerns that we heard from civil society groups about using cameras for this. Obviously, we've already got cameras, sensors of sorts in cars in terms of driver monitoring and drowsiness and so forth. But if it's going to rely on facial recognition and facial monitoring, we know the very significant concerns that come along with that, as opposed to technologies that might detect alcohol based on your finger, the spectrometer, or just picking up your breath or the like. In large part, you raise this accuracy concern, and I think everybody understands that if you have that quote unquote one drink, you might be a big person, you might be a small person, you may be affected differently. How do you set the cutoff at the right point? Obviously, I think even in an emergency, we'd say if you're so stinking drunk that you're going to like go off the road in 2 seconds, you shouldn't start the car.
Mm-hmm.
But if you set it really accurate and really more careful, then it's not going to catch some people who really are. And then whose fault is it when the car started and the accuracy was too general right there? And does any of the technology actually yet suit the purpose to actually be accurate enough at a certain level? So really, really hard questions. And we hope that our report has helped take this issue, which can be very technical and very specific, and broaden, the audience, because it is long-term super important, right? There are a lot of places where technology or laws could make us safer. I could get a shock in my pants every time I speed, or I could instantly get a car ticket, like a speeding ticket, like that could be done today. If I look away long enough. The driver monitoring systems, so far, I think we heard even from some of the, advocates, the data is today kept on your car. You would be nervous having a driver monitoring system if you thought it was going to the police, and you'd get like, hey, pull that car over. That the person's been looking at their kid in the back seat too much. We've made the decision. Let's have the technology help keep you safe. This is not about arresting you or, harsh policing measures, but we do have speed cameras. We do have insurance rates that are kind of relevant to how wacky a driver you are. And I think we do recognize there is some place, you're going to be penalized for smoking when it comes to, insurance. Like we're like, yes, we charge you a big tax on cigarettes, right? There is a place for social policy that nudges us in the right direction. But when does that become a little bit too much of a surveillance society? So you're leading a really important line of work, not only because everyone deals with mobility, but the broader consequences of how technology and law should make us better and healthier and safer versus police us and restrict us.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what makes it exciting to be in this space. So thrilled to have you leading this effort. Thrilled that this report was a real great work where you and the team were able to take a lot of input from all of the stakeholders. That is how we do things at FPF. Nobody has all the answers here, not industry, not civil society, not academia, certainly not government, and certainly not us. But by talking to everybody, we hope we can at least bring a incredibly thoughtful, well-reasoned set of debates. Thank you all for joining us. Happy Friday, Adonne. Congrats on the report, and we look forward to doing more work in this area. Thanks all.
Thank you.